Hey guys, Pete here. Huge thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the This Week I'm Into podcast. If you may notice, this is episode part 2 of whiskey. Yes, that's right. We had so much to talk about whiskey that we ended up splitting this episode into 2 parts. So, if you haven't heard the first part, I highly recommend you go back and listen to that one first. You can listen to me and Paul babble about the world of whiskey, and then we bring Blake on and he starts to guide us through a whiskey tasting. So, that's where we pick up in this episode with the second of 4 drinks in our whiskey tasting. So please go back and check that out if you haven't heard it already. If you have heard it already, then welcome and let's jump right in.
Shall we dive into our Jack Daniels?
Please.
All right. So Jack Daniels is this is the whiskey. When people think of whiskey, they're thinking Jack Daniels. This is one of the most sold whiskeys in the world. Like worldwide, people know they actually have a trademark on their square bottle. This is them. They have this square bottle. So anytime you see that, because you associate it with Jack Daniels, it's pretty awesome. So they've been around forever. They are a Tennessee whiskey, and this is a Tennessee honey whiskey, a little different, but Jack Daniels itself is a Tennessee whiskey, which means it has to be filtered through a maple oak char before it goes into the barrel. So they char a bunch of maple, I guess, wood, and then they pour the whiskey over it to kind of filter out some of the whatever out of it, and then it goes into the barrel to age beforehand. And I think it has to be aged for 3 years. So it's like a couple different regulations on it.
Wait, so where's the Tennessee connection there? Is that like the tree itself is like big in Tennessee? Like I'm confused where the Tennessee comes from.
So I think, so when you get into the labels of whiskey, people get really technical about it because I think there's almost 20 different types of whiskey out there, from like Irish or Tennessee or Kentucky straight or whatever. So it usually has to do with where it's from. So Jack Daniels made this method famous in Tennessee. They wanted to distinguish themselves as being the Tennessee whiskey, so they kind of worked with the government to get this new type of whiskey, this new standard created for them. And it might not have been Jack Daniels, might have been a group as well, but Jack Daniels is the one that really kind of made this their own. So, shall we open?
Yeah, let's open up the Jack Daniels, though.
Let's do it. Jack Daniels, we'll open up the Tennessee honey, and you open up the Tennessee whiskey.
I'm jealous now.
I'm curious, but we'll get different tasting notes so we can compare.
Yeah, mine is the same, but without honey.
Perfect.
Nice, brilliant.
Thank you. This one's not peaty.
So, interesting to note here on the bottle, it says it's a honey liqueur blended with Jack Daniels Tennessee whiskey. Okay? So, in order to be I believe this is a bourbon. I don't know the standards on whiskey, but in order to be a bourbon, you can't be mixed or finished with anything else along with it besides water. The only thing you can add to bourbon is water. And that gets back into the regulatory days back in the 1800s when they said all these. So people were adding some weird stuff. Now the standard is only filtered water. So adding honey to it would actually take it out of being able to be classified as a bourbon. Just kind of a fun fact.
Okay.
Cool.
But yeah, a lot of sweetness on this. You smell that right off the bat. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Not Paul. Yeah, I mean, that just smells like caramel right off the bat. Smells like a Werther's Original to me.
That's a great description.
Guys, I'm going to the store and getting a honey one right now.
Wait, that is 100% what I'm getting now that Blake said it.
I'm excited to get into this. It's been a minute, so let's go ahead. Cheers.
Okay, first sip. Cheers, guys.
Yeah, so that is a flavor bomb. Very different than the Irish whiskey. I'm getting almost no burn here at all.
Yeah, me neither. And I don't know if it's just because it's the second one we've tried.
It definitely might be.
That's pure caramel. That's caramel flavoring to me.
It basically tastes like caramel when it's on your tongue. When you swallow, it's there the entire time. I'm still getting caramel, and it's been down for a little while now.
Sorry, Blake. I'm going to completely derail us for a second. Are you a peanut butter fan?
I am.
How is that peanut butter whiskey What's it called?
Screwball.
There's a few.
Screwball.
Yeah, so I love a good screwball on there. It's tasty. Definitely not one that is going to be popular with your bourbon fanatics, but I like it when I'm out, at a bar or something, and some people are doing shots. It's a really easy shot to do. And to me, that's the most authentic of the peanut butter whiskeys. You get some out there, and it's way too sweet, or it tastes like molasses or something, and that's not for me. But the screwball, you're still getting a little bit of that whiskey on it, and I think it's pretty good. But this, I'm getting almost pure honey. I mean, it's only 70 proof, very low. This is almost like a mixed drink in itself for me. It's got that vibe to it.
To me, that's eating caramel corn, but there's like a little something. There's a little spicy at the end.
That's a great way to
put it.
Which is
the alcohol.
Oh yeah, that.
For the record, though, mine also smells sweeter than the other one. Okay. I mean, mine doesn't have honey in it, but.
So with yours, it's going to be, again, charred in the barrels, or it's aged in the barrels for a little bit longer, I believe, than the Jameson. It's also, I believe, only single distilled. So you're going to still have a bit more of technically what you would call impurities of the alcohol itself. Whenever you're distilling, you're getting more and more pure alcohol out of it. So again, that's where a lot of the flavor comes from. So you might be getting some of those that latched on to more of that barrel character to get the oak out of there. And sometimes people have the oak, or depending on how Jack Daniel's chars their barrels, what level of char they use, you might get more of that sweeter note out of it. So.
All right. Well, I have a question about flavors, but we can save that for the third.
All right.
The third one. All right.
I request, Blake, that you still aim for the square-ish one.
All right.
Yeah, one. Mine's still square. Yeah.
Here we go. All right. We got Jim Beam.
Jim Beam.
Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. All right. Yep. So, Kentucky Straights is another one of the. Maybe this is the one that has to be. Yeah, it has to be aged for 2 years. It's like a weird age statement on it. But other than that, it's bourbon. So bourbon is. There's a lot of misconceptions about bourbon versus whiskey, right? So bourbon does not have to be distilled or made in Bourbon County, Kentucky. It could be anywhere really in America. It has to be in America. Now, Kentucky straight bourbon has to be aged for 2 years and made in, I believe it has to be made in Kentucky. So that makes it, that's the one differentiator there. But Jim Beam, one of the largest distilleries in the world. I actually had the chance to go there quite a few years ago. Just massive facility. And quick history note, I love the history of whiskey, so if I start rambling, let me know.
Please, I would love to hear
it. The Beams had quite a few boys as children, so when they were growing up, they couldn't all run the same distillery. So in Kentucky, Bardstown, Kentucky, which is where Jim Beam is, kind of like central Kentucky, they actually kind of pawned off their sons to a lot of the different distilleries. They found jobs with a bunch of different distilleries. So many of like the classic staple distilleries have some of their roots with the Beam boys. They'll say, oh yeah, we had one of the Beam boys, the fifth boy came over here, he helped us out for a few years, get everything down. And he didn't make every product into Jim Beam, but they did, help their process and figure out what they wanted out of it and kind of standardize their process for them. So honestly, Jim Beam can take a lot of credit for a bunch of the other distilleries out there because of how their family kind of helped out the area. And the other thing is when you go down there, from an outsider's perspective at least, I don't know how it is down there, but it seems like they have a lot of love for the Beam family, just in the way they're willing to help people out and share their knowledge. And it didn't seem like they were trying to gatekeep, in my mind, when I went down there and heard their stories. Now, some of them might have, I don't know how they feel, but I really enjoyed hearing about that community aspect, even from the distillery side. It was very neat.
You got all that info from the Jim Beam tour?
I actually got a little bit of that from the other one, so it wasn't all propaganda. So.
Here at Jim Beam, we love our philanthropy and charity. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just now learning that it's Jim Beam and not Jim Bean.
Like
with an N.
I wasn't expecting to learn that type of thing here, but I'm glad we're learning. So
that's growth right there.
Yep. Yeah, Jim Beam with an M.
So the question that I wanted to ask about flavor is we're talking about aging whiskey in in different kinds of barrels. Hans was teaching me that they make whiskey from different types of grains. Like, where do all the different flavors come from? I have to imagine it's a compilation of a lot of these things, which is why whiskey's probably a pretty diverse flavor profile.
Yeah, no, definitely. The main place that bourbon is getting, or whiskey is going to get its flavor from, is the barrel. Now there is quite a bit to do with the mash bill, it's called. So basically the mash bill is what percentage of each grain they're using. To be called a bourbon, it has to be at least 51% corn. A lot of times you can add wheats, you can add most people add barley. Some add rye to it. Most add a little bit of rye. So those are the four main. You get corn, wheat, barley, and rye. So some of it's going to come from there, right? If you have a high wheat bourbon, it's going to be much sweeter just by nature of having more wheat, more sugar in there. High rye, it's going to be more spicy. That's why you get rye whiskeys. That's at least 51% rye, a bit more spicy on there. So in terms of like the base level flavor, that is coming from which grains you're using. Now, the finishes or those aromas and things you're getting, a lot of that comes from the finish in the barrel. And I will say a little bit might come from the yeast, although most people just use a distiller's yeast, which basically is like any kind of very high production yeast that will allow you to get the most alcohol out of your grains as possible. Because at the end of the day, you're in the business of making alcohol, so you want the yeast to be as productive as possible. So a lot of these distilleries have their own basically living yeast that they use from batch to batch to batch to batch. So it's like their own statement. And that's why you get some of these more unique characters out of certain distilleries, especially some of the younger ones. But then in terms of like the oakiness, the caramel, the vanillas, a lot of that, the non-fruity flavors, I'll say, come in from the barrel. So barrels, with bourbon, I believe with whiskey as well, you need to have new charred oak barrels. And that's one of the main distinguishing factors between American whiskeys, including bourbon, and whiskey anywhere else in the world. So in America, it has to be you have to have the new charred oak barrel. And then a lot of times the American distilleries will sell their barrels over to Ireland, Scotland, Canada, and they'll reuse the barrels in their whiskey production. So although we use all new, it's not the end of the story for the barrel. They get another life elsewhere. A lot of beers are starting to use whiskey barrels and things to age, and a lot of wines as well will age in a whiskey barrel. So it's kind of this shared community of barrels. But so barrels are made at something called a cooperage. And at the cooperage, they have 5 different levels of char. They have a level 1 to a level 5. And basically that means how long they're burning the inside of it for. So they take a torch and they put the barrel over it and they let it char for a little while. Level 1 might only be 5 to 10 seconds. A level 5 might be a minute to a minute and a half. So that's basically getting all that inside nice and blackened so that the whiskey can seep into the oak barrels, get some of that flavor, and then release back in. And one of the reasons why Tennessee and Kentucky are so prominent for their whiskey production is because of their seasons. They go from really, really hot in the summer to really, really cold in the winter. And what that does with any kind of liquid, knowing your science background, that expands and contracts the liquid. So essentially what they're able to do in Kentucky is get a lot more flavor out of their whiskey by their climate, because it's going in and out of the barrels a couple times per year as the weather changes. Whenever they're keeping the barrels in the big rick houses, they're called, they don't have any kind of air conditioning. They are just open to the elements. They change with the seasons. So in the winter, it's going to be cold. In the summer, it's going to be hot. And that will allow these barrels to breathe in and out and let that whiskey get all of its character out of there. So a lot of it comes from the char. Some of it comes from the initial distillation itself, like the fruity flavors. If you get cherry or floral, that comes from the distillation itself. But yeah, a little bit of a history, a little bit of a geography, and a little bit of taste there. So
absolutely love it. The science, the history.
Exactly.
Yeah, love it.
Let's taste our Jim Beam here.
Is it time?
Okay, yeah, I think so. Yeah, I already dumped mine in, so I'm eager. So definitely getting a lot more alcohol, just like the pure alcohol on the top of this one.
All right, I'm going to try it.
All right. Cheers.
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 Whoa.
I think
That
that was
one
the
burned.
harshest one yet.
That one burned.
Definitely the harshest. Again, a pretty light mouthfeel there. More floral though. Did you guys catch that?
I apologize. I did not catch that.
You don't have to
I don't think I got it either.
Okay, now that you know
I
that.
feel like that alcohol hit me way harder
Really
than
hard
any
on
of the other ones. So
Yep. And so part of that might be the age statement. So I think this might only be a couple of years old, so that makes sense. But when you're first smelling it, you might even be able to get a little bit of cherry on it almost, or some sweetness. And then when you taste it, try to see if you can catch any of the floral, kind of lighter flavors in there. And
okay.
that's another thing with tasting. A lot of times I like to go online and find the actual tasting notes from these. And as somebody who's just getting into it, I think that's a great way to start to identify these flavors. If somebody tells you, you should be seeing cherry in here, try to find a cherry. And that might help you to learn what that is, what that should taste like, and then kind of expand your palate that way.
That's a good idea.
Okay. I'm going in for seconds.
And I'm looking for cherry.
I'm looking for cherry or floral.
Did you find it?
I'm not going to say that I found it. I won't lie to you.
That's all right.
You know what? Maybe cherry. Actually, maybe cherry.
All right. Yeah, I think it's very, very different than the Jim Beam or the Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. That is like completely different.
I think I'm definitely with you. These feel like very opposites. Like the Jim Beam, the alcohol like hits you pretty hard.
Yes.
Whereas the Tennessee Honey, it felt like not very alcoholic. It felt more like a syrup almost. So
Yes. Yeah. And this, I mean, like I said, the mouthfeel on this one is very light. I'll say, I mean, even like, okay, you want to talk about the legs there. I'm really not seeing a whole lot. It is 40%, but just really non-viscous. So interesting. But again, I think it's actually pretty good. I wasn't a huge Jim Beam fan for a while, just because I think there's, something about it. Maybe it is that just pure alcohol side of it that isn't quite for me. But this actually isn't as bad as I would have thought. It's pretty good.
We're turning them around.
And that's another thing I want to say. Like, when you're first getting into whiskey, the first thing is going to be, why am I doing this? Why do I like this? And if that's the case, maybe whiskey isn't your thing. But if you want to try to get into it, start somewhere that you know you're going to like it. Maybe start with the Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. I mean, if you're really trying to start at ground level, that's a great place to start. But otherwise, try to find something that's really low proof, something like the 40% alcohol, 80 proof. That's your entry point. And then find something that might say toasted, or that's like I have a couple, like just Elijah Craig Toast. It's a great entry barrel because it's nice and sweet, super easy to drink. Another one is Woodford Reserve Double Oaked. That's like the easiest entry point to whiskey you're going to find. And once you start there, kind of spiral out. Find one that's similar but a little different. And then from there, similar but a little different. And you're going to slowly build your collection around what you like. And by the end, you're going to be somewhere you never would have imagined starting from, but you enjoy it because you got to see how your taste evolved. And I think that's what I've done. And it really helped me to find new things, but also not to venture too far away from the path. So I'm buying stuff I'll never drink,
That's a good point too, right?
All right. Well, speaking of things you'll never drink, we have one more for you.
Are you burying the lead here or something? I'm getting a little nervous for this.
No.
You would
it's
never.
Great.
All right. Well, I'm going in for number 4.
Last one in your goodie bag.
Okay, that's not as bad as it could have been. All right, I was fully expecting Malort, so
should have done Malort. Should have done Malort.
Malort
I don't think
not
I
a
can get
whiskey,
Malort out here.
And you know what?
Nope.
There's a reason for that. Yeah, no, we are drinking Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey.
Fireball cinnamon whiskey.
That is great.
What a classic.
And this is the real Fireball. I don't know if you have heard about that whole ordeal. Again, I'm in law school. I like to keep up with different law related things. There was an interesting lawsuit going around because on the Fireball that used to come in shooters, it was actually a malt beverage. It wasn't technically a whiskey. But this says whiskey with natural cinnamon flavor. So I think they may have succumbed to, I don't know the outcome of that litigation and that suit, but I'm happy to say that this looks like what you might actually get out of a bottle. So
This is, in fact, whiskey, technically.
asterisk.
Yeah.
Feel like I'm on a bachelor trip or something. I mean,
Yeah, what do you know about Fireball, Blake? What's your experience here?
well, what I know about Fireball is trying to remember when I had it, because a lot of times it happens in nights where they get a little foggy. So this is one of those more indulging style types of whiskey. It's good though. I mean, so getting a little bit more diverging from here, whiskey a little bit. A lot of times when liquor stores are trying to build up their array of whiskey offerings, they deal with a supplier. So they have a rep that will come to the store, and they usually get all their whiskey from them, and that rep is only really able to give them whiskey they think they can sell. And one of the benchmarks is Fireball. So if a liquor store sells a ton of Fireball, they're likely going to have some of the more allocated whiskeys because whoever they're getting their alcohol, their whiskey from, knows they can move product and knows that they are probably going to have a good chance of getting rid of this stuff and actually selling it for a good margin. So when they're looking at sales, Fireball is a benchmark product. It's kind of funny. So you never would have thought, but if you want to find more of that really hard to find bourbon at your liquor store, maybe buy some Fireball. Another one is like the Irish cream type stuff that you wouldn't really think about, but that shows that you have people coming into your store routinely buying things at a high pace.
Cool.
That's really interesting because Fireball, I kind of have to imagine, it's popular, right? But it's
Definitely
not necessarily like, I mean, I don't think I'm going out on a limb here when I say it's not like the best whiskey.
It's not the best, but think about it. Like so many people drink it
popular.
Casually, right? And
yeah.
you can't blame them for that at all. I think it's the fact that you know what you're getting every single time. It's a standardized product, and listen, it's easy to drink. So how can you not like it?
But let's be real here. It is easy to drink out of like, I remember like when I first had like whiskeys or like started, drinking a little bit.
Yeah.
I remember drinking Fireball and people around me were like, oh, like Fireball, like that's so gross. But I'm like, this is insanely easy to drink.
Yeah, like you want some, they're going to say
why
yes.
do people hate on this? This is awesome. Now I might associate it with drinking too much, so that's why like maybe I have some not good associations with it, but I will say like maybe it gets a little bit undeserved hate.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Yeah,
guys, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that the notes that I smell are cinnamon.
Whoa,
Is anyone else?
You nailed that. I mean, I have the notes up right
so.
here, and it says cinnamon. So yes, great job.
Thank you.
They don't often say that you can become an expert in just 4 tastings, but Paul, with that one, you knocked it out of the park. Yeah, this one I don't think you need to smell for a full 2 seconds.
Like regret. Like...
No, I only know how to drink this one in one way, and that's as a shooter.
So you won't be coming back for seconds?
No, it is all going down in one.
All right, cheers, y'all.
Oh,
and he does it.
Cheers.
Oh man, legend.
Oh, honestly, I do like it.
And how can you not? I mean, it's very flavorful. It's very good.
It's super easy to drink, but I will say, like, that didn't taste like whiskey. That tasted like cinnamon syrup. Yeah.
Let me tell you, I am drinking this out of a Glencairn I got from one of the distilleries, and it feels a little wrong. It feels like I need to be drinking this
That's sacrilege for sure.
Yeah, a little bit. I need to be drinking this from the bottle itself or a red Solo cup. That feels...
We may be the first people in history to put it in a glass and smell it and look for a tasting note.
That was the longest tasting of a Fireball in history. So, hey, Guinness World Records, I think we hit it.
Yeah, hit us up.
Oh, man, that was great. No, when you look at the realm of whiskey, you got novelty whiskey, you got Irish whiskey, you got classic standard Jim Beam. You guys hit it here with the 4 you grabbed. I mean, these are a great selection of... If you want to look at whiskey as a whole from a 30,000-foot view, this is what you got. So I'd say
good job, Hans.
Kudos to you.
Well, thank you, Blake. So going off that, Blake, I do have a question for you. I know a handful of countries that are famous for their whiskeys, aka America, like bourbon, right? Canada, Japan, Scotland, and Ireland. Do you think I'm missing anybody there?
I don't think so. I think those are the main ones.
Okay.
I don't know of another country that would have one.
Do you have a preference amongst those? And then, like, how do you think each country, like, gets its identity there?
Yeah, so I definitely have a preference. I did a little bit of researching into this beforehand, anticipating the questions. So I do know a little bit about the history and a little bit about how they all kind of came to be. But I definitely prefer the bourbon myself. I mean, out of those, I actually did enjoy Jim Beam the most, which is actually pretty cool. Because again, coming into this, I wouldn't have considered Jim Beam, so that's really good. Now, obviously, whiskey got started out in on the island countries of Ireland, Scotland. They actually started there because they didn't have grapes for wine. So they actually started there with the whiskey. And, in Scotland and Ireland had the crazy roots there back in like 1,000 years ago. Crazy history. Usually run by like the churches and things because the monasteries and things could actually manage the distillation process. But then when it came over to the States with, the colonists, you kind of make do with what you have. So when they came over here, they said, man, we can grow a lot of corn here. Maybe we should make whiskey with corn. So they started having, basically these corn whiskeys.
Yeah, right? Let's replace the grain that's been used. Yeah.
Yep.
To what we have a ton of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you look at the definition of whiskey, it's just it's a grain, it's a grain spirit. So you got your, corn, barley, rye, I'm missing wheat. So those types of grains. And here in the States, we can grow a ton of corn. So when you're looking at any kind of grain to add, and it's still going to be whiskey, let's make it with corn. So they went ahead and did that. And there's a whole bunch of history with taxes and that kind of thing there when you're looking at why they used what they used. And corn is a huge one, right? How do you support the corn farmers? Maybe make some more whiskey. So subsidize that. When you look at like Japan, there's a lot of like rice notes in there too. So you got some rice whiskeys out there. And like, I know there's like sake, that's a whole different thing, obviously, but they do have some rice whiskeys, but a lot of that is just very light. I actually don't know a whole bunch about the Japanese whiskeys. I've indulged a little bit. When I was at Minnesota for school, there's actually a really, really good Japanese whiskey bar up there that I enjoyed. So, it's got its own place there. Canadian whiskey is really smooth. It's like your Crown Royals. I believe it's more blended. It's like you can use, typically you have like 3 or 4 different grains here with bourbon. Canadian whiskey it could be like 20 different grains. It's crazy. You can have a ton of different types of things added in there. So they kind of make do with what they have. And here in the States, again, that's your wheat and that's your corn. We can grow more of it than you could ever imagine. Although, little history fun fact, because I love those.
Fun facts with Blake.
There you go.
Fun facts with Blake.
Yes.
Fun facts with Blake.
There you go. I'll take a little rendition of that. In the wartime, just before like Prohibition in like the early 1900s, they actually put a stop to the production of any spirits with corn and grains because they needed to allocate those grains for the war efforts to send them overseas. So they actually put a whole halt on that. So at one point, there wasn't enough corn to go around, which is kind of funny. So they make do with what they have unless they're told they can't. So pretty interesting.
Thank you for the history. You are clearly so knowledgeable about the history of whiskey. It's so impressive, actually.
I will say that is where I get some of the most enjoyment out of whiskey is the history of it. If you look at anything from the production styles to the names of the whiskey itself, like I'm looking at my desk here, I have like E.H. Taylor. He was the one that started the Bottled and Bond Act. Blanton's is the first guy to ever do single barrel whiskey. Angel's Envy, that's the Angel's Share. That's the whiskey that goes up to the angels in the aging process. So all of these names have some reason behind it. There's one called Larceny, which is one of my favorites because of the Bottled and Bond Act. You had to have basically a government agent come out and inspect the warehouses. And there was this one agent that would go around and he had the keys to all these rick houses and he would sneak some for himself. and he would kind of steal it. So
Good for him.
at Heaven
Good for
Hill, he was their local bond agent, and he would steal it, and they called it larceny after this guy. And it's just kind of funny, like so much history and just the names
Yeah.
and the stories here. It's amazing, and you talk to anyone about it, they love to share it, including myself, obviously. So I love it.
That's amazing, Blake. I wanted to ask you. You obviously have delved into this a lot, so I want to know, in your personal opinion. I know it might differ for different people, but like, what do you think is the best whiskey you've had? Also, I will say, like, you don't have to give away your secrets if you don't want to.
There's no secrets in whiskey. There's no secrets here.
Okay.
No,
all right.
remember how I said I always drink? I never drink the same one twice in a night. The other thing is I will always share anything I have, because there's no such thing as a whiskey that's too good to share. You want people to experience this with you and kind of open up their world. So I really enjoy the whole side of sharing with people and, being in that community. But my favorite one is actually sitting right next to me. I had it here for the occasion. It's the old E.H. Taylor. This is, I just mentioned it, this is one of the main proponents of the Bottled and Bond Act in 1897. I love it because of the history, I love it because of the flavor, and I love it because of how I found it. Remember how I always say, if you find a good bottle of whiskey and it's a little pricey, try to go to a restaurant and try it out?
Yes, yep.
My fiance and I, Alex, who was a previous member of the podcast, were out for her birthday at a nice restaurant in Chicago, and they had it on the menu, so I tried it out, and the great memory of that amazing meal at Maple and Ash was a great spot, along with the bottle itself and the taste of it. It was incredible. However, this is what they call an allocated bottle. So getting into that just a little bit, allocated bottles mean they only make a certain amount, and certain states are allocated on a certain number of bottles, and some states handle it very different than others. So I think like Alabama, if I'm not mistaken, gets a certain number of bottles. They collect them all as a state, and then they have a state lottery. So you go line up, and then you put your name in basically the mix, and you get what you get. So if that state got 100 bottles, 100 people can get that bottle that year.
Can I ask, is that government run, or who is allocating the bottle?
So the distillery itself is allocating the bottle based on sales. So if, for example, I was in Delaware for a little while for work about a year ago, very, very small state in terms of population and whiskey drinkers, they had almost no allocated bottles to go around because they don't have the population, they don't have the market. So
gotcha.
If you go to a place like California or Illinois, we have massive cities, you're going to have a lot more allocations there because you can sell more. So it's a population based, right? So this is a kind of bottle where if they have it, it's usually marked up like crazy because people want it. So retail, I think it's like $58 right now. I have seen it on shelves for $150. It routinely goes for double or triple the cost. And part of that is because of the distillery it comes from. It comes from Buffalo Trace Distillery. It's one of the most famous distilleries right now in terms of their product offerings. They don't necessarily have the most production, but that's where you get Blanton's, which is the one with the horse in the top. And you can collect the Blanton's. I don't know if you ever heard of that. But they have, Blanton's, E.H. Taylor, and Weller. Those are their main whiskeys. So people scramble after them like crazy. So in order to get this bottle, I actually had to go to the distillery, and that's a whole story in itself, where they allow you to get one of any 4 bottles they have per person every 90 days. So, for example, I went there and I got...
Wow, so it's like that exclusive. Like they
have to
keep track of you.
Yep. I'm on a record at Buffalo Trace along with millions of others because there's whole pages on Facebook and websites tracking this stuff, and it's completely random. You wake up in the morning, they post what they're going to have, and you get what you get. So
you don't even know what you're going to get when you show up.
No, it's one of 4. So Blanton's, Weller Special Reserve, E.H. Taylor, and Eagle Rare are the 4 they offer, and they do it on a random schedule. It's never like back to back, but it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we went down there. Alex and my fiance and myself went down there, and we had to go back 3 days because they didn't have E.H. Taylor the first day. But the secret there is you bring a non-whiskey drinker, i.e. Alex, and you can get 2 bottles then. So I was able to get 2 bottles of both Blanton's, Weller, Eagle Rare, and E.H. Taylor, and it worked out very well. And I'm telling you, this is far and away my favorite. It's one of those special occasion type whiskeys. You can tell I've had a few special occasions. This was the one that kind of saw me through getting into law school, coming here, first final season, all sorts of stuff that require whiskey. So it was a good time. But
Blake, is this trend into allocation of whiskey something new? And is it just with either like big name distillers just making more specialty batches, and or like similar to how like beer is becoming more like small craft brewers? Is that happening in whiskey that's causing this? Or like, do you see any trends in the whiskey space that you want to share?
Yeah, definitely. There are some crazy trends right now. And coming down a little bit actually. So with the pandemic, there was an absolute influx of people wanting to buy whiskey. I wonder why. So these distilleries, when you think about whiskey, right, it has to be aged. You can only plan so far in the future. So when the demand spiked, they didn't have the product sitting on the shelves to support it. And as people were buying them up, a lot of the liquor stores were able to raise their prices to crazy amounts, where a bottle that's normally $50 is $150. So that has been crazy for the past 5 years. Now, these distilleries are not dumb. They understand the market. They ramped up production like crazy. They saw this and wanted to capitalize on it. So anything unique they could do with their barrels and to make them into a unique bottle, they were doing it. They were doing a single barrel. They were doing a limited release. They're doing, brand new labels are popping up left and right to try and catch on to this fad that was happening in the whiskey realm. This is not just the massive distilleries. Buffalo Trace is the most well-known. Honestly, I think it is truly because of Blanton's. I'll talk about that just a little bit. Blanton's comes in a really weird bottle. They started releasing it in the 80s, basically because they were on a similar downturn, and they wanted to try and see how they could pick up the market. So they decided, what happens if we take all of our whiskey from one barrel and bottle it like that? First single barrel bottle. They did that, and they also released it in this really unique bottle that comes with a cork that has a horse on it. And there are 8 different corks, each with a letter that spell out Blanton's. Collect them all, right? So let's try and increase this market, right? They're not dumb.
Smart.
Yep.
Smart.
So that, I think, is how they got started. But so many other distilleries, whether because they don't distill enough or because they have these special releases, also do allocation. So honestly, almost every single one, like Heaven Hill does allocations with their Henry McKenna and Old Fitzgerald. I don't know if Jim Beam does a whole lot, but like Peerless itself is just by definition allocated because they're such a small distillery right now. They can only handle so much. So most of their product is allocated because they want to make sure they can spread it out to the states they have. A lot of the smaller distilleries are just by nature allocated for that same region. They don't have the reach that these bigger ones do. However, if you look at the timeline of whiskey aged to 4 or 5 years, we're at a point right now where the market is becoming saturated with a lot of these. So demand is going down. Prices are finally starting to come down where these bottles are a bit more approachable. So now these are sitting on the shelf and you can find them again, which is fantastic. So
like if we go back in the timeline 4 or 5 years ago, we're hitting like COVID time where demand was up and then production goes up, and now here we are.
Yep. The
aftermath. Okay, I gotcha. Yep. Okay.
So for example, I think Buffalo Trace itself was going to basically double production. And now the market, there's always going to be a market for Buffalo Trace. However, I don't know if they're going to get the same kind of prices they could at one point. They also have a whole different line called the Antique Collection. Those are aged anywhere from 17 to 25 years. So you got to think those are bottled in 2000. Like that's how old some of these bottles are. Some of these barrels are. I should say they're barreled, put in the barrel 25 years ago, not bottled. So they really have to plan ahead for those. And
25 years, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't see those changing at all. Some of those bottles go for $2,000 to $4,000. I mean, they are absolutely
Holy
crazy.
cow.
Okay, so that's an absurd amount of money. How much do you think that would indicate that it was that value of whiskey, right? I mean, what, I don't know, maybe you can tell us, like a Jim Beam, a fifth of Jim Beam. I don't know how much that costs, but how much do you like expensive whiskeys? Like, how much do you expect for them to be that much better?
I definitely think it tops off. I think the most I've ever paid for a bottle of whiskey, I think it was $120. Now, some of that, again, is intrinsic. It comes from the hunt. I talked about bourbon hunting a little earlier. Like, you don't expect to see these bottles on the shelf. If I go into a store and I see a bottle of E.H. Taylor in its market price, MSRP, I'm going to buy it. Like, it's kind of a high. Like, what are the odds I would find this? I was here at the right time. And
okay.
That's a whole other thing. I won't, to answer your question here, though, I'll say, how much better is it? I don't know if it's, what would that be? I mean, 40 times better if you're talking $50 is a normal price of a bottle of whiskey, right? So I don't see it being that much better. I think it's great. I think this is some of the best whiskey in the world. Don't get me wrong. But that is the better part of it. It's how many of these bottles exist. We talked a little earlier about how they dilute whiskey in order to sell more barrels of it or more bottles of it. You remember how we talked about the angel share a little bit too, when enough is released into the atmosphere over time. Think about these barrels sitting for 25 years. They are only getting about 20% of what they put into that barrel out of it. So much of it has been lost. And then a lot of times they're barreled at a higher proof too, around the 107, I think is what those are typically. So they're not diluting it as much. So not only are they losing 80% of it, they're only diluting it about half. So because of that, they can only sell a certain amount. And again, you have to get the same amount of money out that you put in, plus probably a little bit for the, antique side of it. So if you can normally make, let's say, $10,000 from a barrel of whiskey, again, I have no idea what number it actually is. If you're selling 5 bottles or if you're selling 100 bottles, that number has to come out of there. So that's how the price kind of comes out. It's all economics at the end of the day. They're running a business and they know what they're doing. They've been doing it for years. So
yeah, that's for sure. Alcohol is always one of those, like, oh, it's basically the oldest business. One of those like oldest businesses.
Not to infringe on the fun facts too much, but I do have another crazy fact.
Yes, let's hear it.
The first Consumer Protection Act ever was the Bottled and Bond Act, before the Food and Drug Administration was even a thing. It was almost 10 years before. So 1897, the Bottled and Bond Act was passed. This is one of my favorite facts about whiskey because I think the heritage of it, the history of it is amazing. What it stands for is really cool. And also the fact that it came before the government even was regulating anything. Basically, people were adding all sorts of weird additives. They were adding molasses and tar and tobacco just to try and flavor the whiskey and get it that dark color quicker. Because again, time is money. So if you're aging these things for 4 years, you're not making money. A distillery could pop up and within 6 months be selling their whiskey by adding tobacco to make it a certain color. But people were getting sick. People were getting, all sorts of different diseases and ailments from these whiskeys. And the government taxes whiskey like crazy. So if people stop buying whiskey, the government stops getting money. So Colonel E.H. Taylor, who was actually the mayor of Frankfurt for a little while, worked with the government and his friend at the Treasury Department to make this Bottled and Bond Act, which basically said you can only add, we're going to give you a tax incentive if you only add clear filtered water. You have to bottle it, or it has to be bottled at 100 proof, new American charred oak barrels, aged 4 years, kept in a locked rickhouse so nobody could go in there and tamper with it. That's how you had these government agents coming out and inspecting every now and then. So a whole bunch of regulations on it. And all of that was based on basically the government making sure they could still get taxes out of their whiskey because it was such a cash cow for them. So the history of it is amazing. And a bunch of different labels have Bottled and Bond products. E.H. Taylor is one of them. Heaven Hill has a ton of bonded products. They pride themselves on it. And I do too. I think I have 8 bottles on my shelf right now that are Bottled and Bond, and I love it. So
okay, so that's like, instead of organic, that's another
Yes.
tag that they'll put on there.
great analogy. I never thought about that. Yeah, it's essentially, yeah, it's not organic. It's bottled and bond. That's a perfect way to look at it.
That's awesome. I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah, and it's a really cool history.
Like, one thing I wanted to touch on was I've seen your infinity bottle that you have on your counter, because right, you have a lot of whiskeys and then you have this very interesting I think yours is in the shape of a golf club.
Yep.
Of a container where you pour different whiskeys into. I was like, and the first time I saw it, I was like not completely sure what that was. So if you wouldn't mind, could you explain like what is an infinity bottle whiskey and like what's kind of the purpose it serves?
Yeah, no, this is one of those more unique things in the whiskey community. Not everyone does it. Some people look really weirdly at it, but I love it. You can tell I have a panache for the history. I love the story that whiskey can tell. So an infinity bottle is basically like a decanter or a bottle that you might have that is basically a blend of all the whiskey in your collection. And it grows along with your collection. That's what they call it, an infinity bottle. So, for example, when I first made my first one, I had 18 different types of whiskey. I put about 2 ounces of each whiskey, mixed them all together, and made my own Blake blend, essentially, is what I did. I never called it that before, but I'll call it that here. So
official.
There you go. Just put a trademark on it. Or yeah. So I now have this bottle of whiskey that is emblematic of my collection, and as I drink it and as I get more bottles, I'll add more.
Are you drinking out of it?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, I thought I didn't know if this was like a kill shelf for adults.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, that's a good way to think about it. But this is basically, again, it's like, imagine if you could have a footprint or a fingerprint for all of the whiskey you have. This is my collection. This is my unique collection in what I have. I want to taste it, see how it is. There you go. Yeah,
this is my whole collection.
Perfect.
Mix it all together.
So Paul right now could make an infinity bottle of Jack Daniel's regular, not the honey, Jim Beam, Jameson, and Fireball. It would be one of the weirdest infinity bottles ever, but you could do it, and that would be the Paul Infinity. That would be the Paul blend. Now, as you drink it, you get more room in the decanter. I can add the whiskeys I've gotten since, and it'll evolve over time. And if you remember earlier, I said I was an engineering background. So, of course, I made an Excel spreadsheet to track all this.
I was actually going to ask that. I love that.
No way.
Yeah, this is new for 2025. I made a spreadsheet that tracks how much I put in, when I put it in, and then when I take some out, and then basically what batch I'm adding the new whiskeys in. So at any given time, I'll be able to say, all right, this blend right here is 1.25% X. Or
I
whatever.
Love that. That is the coolest thing. That might be the best fact I've heard all day.
It's not so nerdy and amazing.
I actually thought about like marketing it because I thought it'd be like, there's enough people out there that do this, right? So why not have a way for us to track what we're drinking and what's there? And as you drink whiskey, eventually you're going to finish them. Now, going back to the disclaimer I made earlier about not being an alcoholic, I will say the best collection is one that grows. One that doesn't get depleted super quickly and you run out, because it means you're not drinking it fast enough to run out. So mine is definitely growing, but eventually you're going to finish a bottle. And this is a good way to remember that and to think back to when you got your first bottle, what, if you enjoyed it, how it matches up with all the other ones. And then when you're drinking it, this is the weirdest tasting notes you're ever going to find, because it's a mixture of all of them. What is coming through when, and how did my taste evolve?
Unique, right? This doesn't exist anywhere else in the world.
It cannot.
This is your infinity bottle.
Other than the nostalgia of it, though, is it actually any good?
I love it.
Good question. That is a great question.
So remember what I was saying earlier about the spiral? You find something you like and you spiral out from that. So by nature, a lot of what you drink is going to be at least somewhat similar to each other. And as of right now, I'm actually on a little bit of a trend toward the weeded bourbons. So that's like Weller, Bardstown doing some great stuff. Just came out with another one. Redwood Empire has one. So more on the weeded side, high wheat content. And the Infinity bottle is kind of going toward that now. So more of the sweeter side. And you can start to see how it's going to change over time with your palate and how that changes. So if you keep up with it and you keep on adding things, I think it should, by definition, be good because it's a mixture of everything you like. So it's kind of a cool way to look at it.
It reminds me of when I was a kid and I'd go up to the soda machine and I'd put a little bit of everything.
Right, yeah. There's a certain name for that. I forget. But yeah, exactly. It's like a mixture of everything because you can't decide. And at the end of the day, it actually, I mean, sometimes those didn't
It
taste
tastes
like
like
good,
Fanta, is what it
Ooh.
tastes like.
This doesn't taste
That's
like
the
Fanta.
I hope not.
Yeah, not quite. But yeah, it's pretty neat.
Amazing. Blake, so obviously we're all about jumping into a new hobby, new passion, new interest every week. So what is the elevator pitch for why should someone explore a new whiskey?
Yeah, I think I've hit on a couple of them as we've talked, so I'll kind of sum it up here. The bourbon community is weirdly tight knit. Wherever you go, you can enjoy a glass with somebody, and it's really about kind of exploring it and experimenting together, and also sharing what you learned. Like I said, I went to a liquor store that I'd never been to, talked with the employee for a half hour, and it's a great conversation. You're both talking about something you like, and you could be anywhere in the country, sometimes other countries too, and you're talking about something like this. And the history side of it is awesome, but also it's just the memories that you get out of it by, like, I can tell you where I got every single one of my bottles, why I got them, why I like it, if there's a special occasion that is associated with it. And there's a lot of nostalgia for me that I love. So I think that's why I keep on going. But there's also a whole community online of people that experiment together and try to, figure out when these things are going to drop, if it's an allocation, or how they like the new product from this one distillery, or, diamonds in the rough. How can I find a cheaper version of this thing that I can never find? And everyone out there is just working together to, enjoy this stuff together. And I love it. So that's where I'm at.
That's amazing. I mean, I feel like me personally, I'm bought in now.
Perfect.
Yeah, maybe it was because you like walked us through the tasting notes of a Fireball, but
you sure it's not just the Fireball talking here, or
maybe it's the Fireball talking.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Amazing. Blake, do you have any plugs, either personal, any piece of media you want to give a shout out to, any content creators, anything like that?
Whiskey brands.
Yeah, I actually
whiskey brands.
I have a couple whiskey
absolutely.
brands, and I have a couple of content creators that I probably wouldn't be knowing anywhere near what I know if it weren't for them. So the first one I'll say is Bruzel. A guy named TJ. He runs a YouTube channel. Incredible guy, just down to earth. I think he's from either Alabama or Georgia. He's got that southern accent. He is doing some incredible things with the media he's putting out and tastings, and he does the bourbon hunting. So if you want to know what that is, no better way to discover it than by watching some of his stuff. He's a lot of fun. So Bruzel, Brewzle on YouTube. Great guy.
As in, is he like finding the allocated bottles in the different states?
Yeah, basically, like he'll go to different liquor stores that people recommend to him and see what they have, kind of rate their selection, see if it's worthwhile, if he would shop there. Oftentimes he'll talk to the owner and kind of understand what their, like, how they run their store, what their allocation is, that type of stuff. So sometimes if I'm going to a new area, I'll pull up one of his videos and see where he went, see what the selection is, and then find it. So I've done that a couple times. It's kind of fun.
Amazing. Okay.
But then on Instagram, I'm millennial, so I do the Instagram reels more than the TikTok. So the Rock's Bourbon Review is a new guy I found. He does like a bourbon bracket right now. It's a lot of fun. So he basically made a March Madness style bracket of all these different whiskeys and is pinning them up against each other. And he does a really good job with it. Really short videos and kind of a fun way to get the tasting notes from different ones head to head. The Three Bourboniers are a group of three guys that kind of do, like, they'll do competitions to see who can find what this one whiskey is, or they'll do the blind taste to see which they like better and how much they'd pay for it. Because a lot of whiskey is the label, not necessarily the juice, the whiskey itself. So if you could do a blind taste and say, I'd only pay $20 for this, but it's a $2,000 whiskey, you know it's the label. So that's a really cool way to get into that. But then as far as brands, I think right now, Buffalo Trace, we talked about that. They're doing a whole bunch of stuff. If you don't know them by now, whatever. But Bardstown Distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky, it's a relatively new one. I really like them because of my science background. They are all about like sharing everything that they're doing and experimenting with different mash bills, different content of grains and how they're distilling it and everything. So they're doing incredible things right now. The whiskey is great. One of my most favorite weeded right now is from them. So Bardstown Distillery, fantastic. And then Peerless is one of the lesser known ones. It was revived in 2015 by the fourth and fifth generation of the original creator back in 1937 when it shut down. So it was on like almost a 90-year hiatus, and they revived it, and they're doing some really, really good stuff. A little on the pricey side, a little trickier to find, but incredible whiskey. So I'd recommend those two.
That is amazing. Thank you, Blake.
Of course. Yeah.
Blake, oh my gosh, you are so knowledgeable about whiskey. This has been incredible. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm happy you were able to listen to me for this long, because I love it. I can obviously talk for a while. The whiskey gets me talking too, so I wonder if that had something to do with it.
Yeah, maybe it helped. Maybe helped all of us.
Exactly. It's great. I love it.
Well, I gotta ask before you go, Blake. Are you gonna add the Fireball into the Infinity bottle?
Ooh, you know what? I might add a waft. I might do a little chemistry waft.
Just a waft,
yep,
okay.
the memory of
He'll
this.
stand over it and go like this.
Exactly.
Well, he finished the whole thing, right? So there's nothing left to add.
I'm not gonna lie, I did not. I still got a good, healthy. I can't lie to you guys.
Fair.
Oh yeah,
Amazing.
It's been amazing being here. I appreciate you having me on.
Yes, Blake, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the This Week I'm Into podcast, and a huge thank you to Blake Schweiner for sharing his passion on whiskey. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, please reach out at thisweekiminto@gmail.com and give us a follow on Instagram at thisweekiminto. Please rate us 5 stars and share this episode with a friend. We're doing our best to grow the podcast, and your help really goes a long way. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you on the next one.
Another quiet night. Just me, my thoughts, and a damn fine glass of whiskey.
Aye, lad. You picked a good one tonight.
Huh? Oh, he did more than that. He chose history, adventure, and the essence of time itself.
Time. A patient friend. A cruel master.
Oh, great. The whiskey bottles are talking again.
Listen here, lad. I was barreled on the roughest stormy night you can imagine. Waves crashing, barrels rolling, half my batch was lost to the sea. But I survived. Aged 12 long years, waiting for a worthy drinker.
That's cute. I spent my days lounging in the most exclusive parlors, being poured for only the finest guests. Diplomats, actors, the guy who invented the folding chair. Yeah, he drank me.
Fool! You dwell on the past, but whiskey is about patience, maturity, the slow dance of time and oak, until perfection.
All right, guys, I get it. You all have stories. And now, so do I.
Wait, Paul. Are you telling me the whiskey bottles talk to you?
No, Hans, they're telling me their stories. There's a difference. Every bottle has a story, and there's ones worth listening to.
Paul, I think you need to lay off the whiskey.